Okay, hello, hello, hello. Welcome to yet another episode of WhickTV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. And today, our topic runs more serious, runs more political. We're moving away for the moment from the drama, and we're going to be talking about federal funding and institutions in the government. We're going to be talking about whether or not Biden should be withholding federal funds from states that pass discriminatory, quote unquote, legislation, whether that be anti trans legislation, whether that be the Florida Stop Woke Act, what have you. Are there any conditions under which a sitting president should withhold federal funds to the state, and what conditions are those? So we'll get into it without further ado. Thank you all for being here. I'm glad you tuned in, whether you're on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you are on Twitch, hit that follow button if you haven't. Throw me some bits and subs, and let us go. We're going to start with the one, the only, the drama llama himself. 𝕵𝖎𝖎, go ahead.
Thank you for having me on, Wick. Thank you for my fellow panelists and all the viewers tuning in for making this thing possible. God Emperor Biden has my support no matter what, because I know he'll do no wrong, and that's why I know he's not going to do this, because it's the wrong move. Withholding federal funding is a tool on the tool belt, and it's a big one. And I think there are uses for it, but I don't think this rises to the level. It is true that we've got our unruly Republican Party that violates norms like no other, and I am in favor of Democrats, getting a little more dirty and getting on that level, but to do something that not even the Republicans were willing to do, and to weaponize it over an issue like this, which I do think is important, but is nowhere near to, I think, the worst that Republicans are doing across the country right now, I don't think is an appropriate use.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Portland is Burning. We're going to go a little.
Going a little out of order. Hey, Wick, thanks for having me on. Nice to see everybody here. 𝕶𝖎, I think, is the only person I've never spoken to before. Nice to meet you. I do think that there are appropriate ways to apply force to the states if you find the states to be taking action that falls outside of the policy guidelines of the federal and executive branch. I look forward to talking about what good and bad uses look like, and whether Republicans have been willing to exercise this sort of tactic in the past, which I think there are notable examples of, even as recently as in the Trump administration and as recently as 2020, when it comes to the attempts to withhold federal funding from COVID relief bills for states that were quote unquote anarchist states and cities. So looking forward to talking about it, and thanks for having me on again.
Oh, thanks for being here. I'm looking forward to talking about it as well. Speaking of talking about it, 𝕍𝖎. Hi.
Hi. Over the last several decades, the power of the legislative branch has ultimately been decreased and placed directly within the hands of the executive and judiciary branches of the federal government. I fundamentally disagree with taking power out of the hands of the people, which this deification of the executive and judiciary does. Not building parallel structures within the society creates unjust hierarchies that ultimately subjugate the average person and permits the will of those who are a control loci of power. Biden should not withhold funds from states that violate federal rules, not laws, as those rules are made through executive order without the permission of the legislature, thus ignoring the will of the people. This argument has already been decided in the Trump-Ukraine scandal and subsequent impeachment of Donald J. Trump, as the legislature must be allowed to decide where federal funds are allocated. Although I don't advise it, ignoring the will of the people is absolutely something we can all do, and I do hope to remind everyone in this forum of the French Revolution and the guillotine. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, fish rots from the head, and this place smells like a whorehouse. Bingo, bango, boom.
Well,
Mic drop.
There we go. Next up, speaking of rotting from the head, 𝕶𝖎, go ahead.
That's what's up. So as far as I'm aware, the Republican Party has never even attempted to restrict funding for states restricting healthcare that the American Medical Association has considered medically necessary. Back in 2012, Biden has said, as VP, that transgender rights were the civil rights issue of our time, and if that is true, which I believe it is, we should deal with it federally as we've dealt with every civil issue, when in 1957, President Eisenhower commanded the National Guard to force integration in the state of Arkansas. I don't know if that's an exact parallel, but I do recommend a similar action today.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll get into it during the open. Next up, Pondering Politics. Go ahead.
Sorry, there have been a few rebrandings since then. I am Pondering Politics. You can call me Josiah. It's my real name. I'm the artist formerly known as Ruminate, Destiny Orbiter, who tries to pressure him away from drama streaming and back into the world of politics. It's been an uphill battle, especially here lately, but I'm familiar with, I've worked with Flow Trace and Stacks and had conversations with Portland's pretty good in the past. As far as my position here, transgender rights are under attack aggressively across this country in red states. More than 400 anti-trans legislations that the ACLU is tracking in just this legislative session alone. And I do think President Biden should be willing to, as Flo Trace said, reach to the toolkit and use this particular tool, even though he doesn't want Biden to do it. I do. I think that we need to be aggressive. We need to be creative. Republicans have absolutely threatened to employ this in the past and have done is righteous.
Righteous causes. Well, thank you for coming, and we'll see how it goes. But we have one more individual who has an opinion, and we need to get his, my token libertarian that I bring on the panel for people to beat up. Lactoid, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Wick. This is going to be fun. So, 3 points I want to quickly make. The first point, federal funding / taxation is bad generally, but selectively taking tax money and then providing that money based on decisions of the states is essentially the feds coercing states to make decisions and is thus chipping away at federalism, which, absent a very good reason to do so, is not good. And finally, some of the bills are good and reasonable, and the feds coercing people away from good things is by definition bad. So therefore, the Biden administration should not withhold funds from states that pass legislation, such as the Stop Woke Act or quote-unquote anti-trans bills.
Okay, and with that, have at it. I'd only ask that if you have trouble getting in, please raise your hands. If I ask you to shut up, please shut up, or you will be made to shut up. But other than that, go at it, gang. What do we think?
I want to talk to Staxiums first. Staxiums, you said before, one of the things that you specifically said is that at no point did even Republicans do this. We actually can see that in 2020, there was a probe that came out that showed that Republicans did, in fact, Donald J. Trump did, in fact, withhold legislative funds that were
for Ukraine,
Puerto Rico, right? I think that's a corollary here, where it's basically someone that isn't playing along with the rules of some unjust ruler that ultimately is withholding funds from the legislature, right? I do think that is something that actually legitimately happened, and I was just wondering why that wasn't something you mentioned in your opening statement.
Yeah, for sure. What I meant to, what I was essentially hinting at my opening statement was that Republicans have absolutely restricted federal aid towards states, but never something that has been supported by the American Medical Association to be confirmed medically necessary. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is different things are different, right? That like we can try drawing all of these parallels, but the fact of the matter is that Republicans have never restricted federal aid for states who were attempting to stop trans-affirming healthcare for disenfranchised groups. And maybe I don't see these things as similar when they are similar. Like I get different things are different. Is I guess what I'm saying.
So what you're saying is that when federal aid is
Staxium, because Staxium, you're referring to like the medical infrastructure, like the general medical establishment is something that they've never gone against in their willingness to exercise this tactic. But in 2020, Donald Trump took extensive efforts and was very outspoken about his intention to withhold COVID relief funds from states that weren't compliant with, or were, in his words, I think,
Portland. Well, hang on. I think you're misunderstanding Staxiums. You're misunderstanding Staxiums. What he's trying to say is that when Republicans have done this in the past, Stacks, correct me if I'm wrong, it's been for illegitimate and immoral reasons. They've never employed this tactic for a righteous cause. In this, they've never withheld or threatened to withhold federal aids from states because those states are defying medical authorities. That's what you're saying would be the distinction here. President Biden would be doing that for a righteous cause.
So here's the question, though. Why are we talking about righteous cause and we're not talking about the actual function of the law and the function of our government to begin with? The legislature are the ones that carve out where money goes. When it comes to this rule that Biden is trying to impose, where he's trying to basically go ahead and make carve-outs where if you don't allow transgender athletes to be involved in sports, where it doesn't affect competition and everything as per the article, right? This is something that comes down to the executive basically superseding the legislature, thus superseding the will of the people, right?
The courts would have to litigate whether or not that's illegal. I'm not.
I guess what my point. Just
Hey, we gotta let people finish. So Rezi, finish your thought, and then Stacks. Okay, that's yours. And then either I know Pondering wanted to get in there and ruminate. I'm sorry. Pondering and Stacks.
Just call me Josiah, buddy.
Josiah, okay, because I'm going to mix up the ruminate and pondering, and that's going to keep happening. So Josiah and Stacks. Go ahead.
Calling him floundering going forward.
Yeah, nice attempt at a rebrand, buddy.
Did you have a response? So Reza,
I didn't know if it was by. Can I?
Go ahead, please.
Gotcha. Sorry, my bad. Sorry. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I would have frustrations with executive orders. Sometimes and sometimes not, depending on the act. Like, I don't want to look at this so uniformly, where it's just if a president does something to direct federal aid that hasn't been stipulated by the courts, it's bad necessarily. It's bad when it's bad and it's good when it's good. And I agree with the way that Biden is currently restricting federal aid. And I wouldn't agree if Trump is trying to restrict aid to Ukraine like he did in 2018.
I think we're having...
But this comes down to the idea of like what is bad and what is good, which becomes a moralistic argument, right? Which doesn't have any grounding where we can agree upon, right?
Well, like, the Supreme Court has outlined when the Supreme Court has outlined what kind of federal authority, what kind of qualifications the federal government must meet to restrict funding from states. It's well defined in South Dakota v. Dole. It's like a 30-year-old decision.
Right, that's where
whether or not
I think 𝕼 is wrong. The federal government does.
The legislature make those decisions.
Yeah, but it's not entirely up to the legislature. The presidents, since time immemorial, have used the power of executive order in their agencies to conditionalize federal funding, and it's not been challenged or overthrown in every court precedent. There is precedent for this, and there's a legal avenue for it.
So the question is, stop.
You would have to make the case that in this particular case it would be illegal.
Stop. The legality of it. We're just going to assume it is. And I think that it is. We're not talking about the legality. My question, and what I'd like to talk about, what I'd like us to discuss, isn't whether he can do it legally, but whether he should do it. Like, whether he should use this tool in this case. Just because you have a hammer doesn't mean you should go pounding every nail you see. Right? Like, that I think is the more interesting discussion here, the more interesting topic, because I think the courts can decide what's legal and what's not, but here in Twitch, we get to decide what's right.
I think that for the purposes of accepting the distinction between...
decides that for powers of the purse. So
okay. I want Portland and then Flowtrace. Go ahead.
So, for the purposes of sort of acknowledging on a legal and societal level that we've decided there's a meaningful distinction between sex and gender, I think it makes sense for Title IX to be redefined in this way that incorporates kind of trans inclusionary language and defines sex and gender as equally respective categories that are both legally protected. So, yeah, I think it's appropriate.
I agree with that. Like, fundamentally, I agree that Title IX is, again, based off of a law passed by a legislature, right? And then expanding that to other unprotected groups, probably based. But I'd also like to go ahead and throw it to Flowtrace, because I feel like I've taken the counter-argument part against the three of you, one of whom I have already slain in the fields of battle.
I want to try to bridge the gap with with stack systems here, I think the sort of difference that we're having is there can be a moral valuation both in the tool and the end. So I think I'd probably agree with you that these bills are bad, that stopping them is a good thing, as opposed to, using this tool for a bad end. But I think there's a question, at least I think there's a moral value, or rather a negative moral value, to the use of this tool in the first place. It's the kind of thing that I would only want to do in a very dire situation. I don't know if that's like sort of helping to explain. I think if we enter a world where the executive is going to be conditionalizing federal funding for things that aren't super related, right? This is I think the real difference between this and Ukraine, for example, is the way in which Trump, besides the fact that it was probably an election, it was a violation of election laws, is that he was using funding that's unrelated to try and get dirt on Biden, right? He's saying this funding that we've agreed to give you for your self-defense, we're not going to give you that, not for anything related to self-defense, but because I need you to do this thing for me, right? It's fundamentally different than, for example, there's a lot of federal regulations on whether or not we're going to fund highways in your states based off of your drinking age laws. That's one of the reasons why I think it's almost every state except for one or two, the drinking law is the exact same, because the federal government says if you don't have that, well, then you're going to need to find out how to fund your federal highways on your own. So when you start to erode on that, I think it's a very dangerous road to go down, because it starts to normalize behavior that I think is very unstable for our democracy, right? You can imagine if we do this the next time that, for example, Republicans are in power, they would feel much more emboldened, I think, to go after funding in the same way. That's going to create a dysfunctional state, in my opinion.
Hello. So the issue with the Ukraine situation and Trump is actually, you said it first. It was the fact that President Trump was using congressionally approved foreign aid to try to benefit himself personally to get dirt on a political rival. That's what made it unethical. That's what made it an impeachable offense. Presidents, again, since time immemorial, have leveraged federal aid to affect outcomes they want. Jimmy Carter did it during the Carter administration. Vice President Biden did it during the Obama administration.
But I think it's a question of degrees.
Say what?
I think it's a question of degrees. There has been this kind of leveraging, but I think this leveraging is a very strong example of it, and it's in a situation that I don't think is good justification.
Well, I'm sorry. Did you who agreed? Did you say the legislature?
No. I'm saying I agree with you that that there are justifications for this, but I think that this usage is not justified. This feels like an extreme use given the nature of how disconnected it is, and it feels like it is being deployed for something that we're using a nuclear launcher for like a home invasion.
Well, I'm confused about the connection issue. So again, nobody would have had issues. Nobody would have taken issue with President Trump leveraging congressionally approved foreign aid or defense aid to pressure Ukraine into like cleaning up its internal corruption situation, which is again what Vice President Biden did. He didn't, when he threatened foreign aid for Ukraine to remove its prosecutor general Viktor Shokin. It wasn't aid that was directly connected to Shokin. It was disconnected. Yes. It was just some sort of leverage that the Obama administration had to affect an outcome they wanted. That was perfectly rational. It's perfectly legal, and nobody disputed it. It doesn't have, the funding doesn't have to have a direct connection to the desired outcome. It has to be leverage that can be employed. And again, presidents have done it since time immemorial. I would argue that in this situation, it is good, because we're talking about in the case of like discriminatory legislation, we're talking about protecting marginalized groups, like in particular the trans community, which has a disproportionately high rate of suicidality. We've seen the increase in incendiary rhetoric, red state legislative aggression. I would say this qualifies as a pretty serious thing, that at least for Biden to start gesturing in that direction.
I think.
Hold on, I want to dig into this really quick, if I can. I want to ask Flowtrace and the other two gentlemen on the other side of the argument. Do you think that it makes sense to distinguish and like recognize both sex and gender as protected categories within Title IX? Like, do you think that is an update we should make to Title IX with consideration to how trans people engage with our society?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would
totally
agree with that fundamentally. I think it needs to go through the legislature, not through executive order.
Okay, so you think that the biggest problem is that it needs to go through the legislature to specifically change the language of Title IX officially.
Do you agree with all of the
I think that my biggest issue is that we have seen an inordinate amount of power concentrated within the executive and the judiciary branches, and the weakening of the legislative branch since World War II. I think that this has led to a lot of issues within our government, within checks and balances, and a myriad of other issues. That's why I do support the overall intent of the action. I just don't support the where this ends up leading. Again, as Flotre stated before, I think that this ultimately allows for the president to become a rampant monarch, and I'm not Beckett, so like obviously I'm not a monarchist, so
Okay.
I'm against monarchy, right? I think
Okay.
that monarchy is super unbased. USA all the way, forever and ever. These
Cool.
colors
Wait.
don't fucking
Hold.
run.
Oh, I support. Okay, fuck, man. Look, America flag.
I get
I've
it.
got
Okay,
no-
okay. Let's just
USA, USA.
I want to do two things real quick. I want to point out that for the purposes of like the federal government's role in this kind of thing, the federal government's role is like dictating and interpreting policy, not law. Law is like dictated, but goes through the legislative branch and is established legally. The federal government is specifically like their role in this case is to interpret and dictate policy, which in their minds is to, like in Biden's mind, is to interpret Title IX as having like respective consideration for both gender and sex. So
I think that you need to separate
then
what you're
go
saying.
through. That would still like
That
to
would still be-
become
that would be an
law,
application
go
of
through
Title
the
IX. That
legislative
would-
like the legislative framework to be like formalized. But the Biden administration's role in this case is to say this
Okay.
is how we interpret it.
I want to get Lactoid in here. Lactoid's been trying. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Lactoid.
Please.
Just want to say quickly two things. So, in terms to answer the question, should sex and gender be kind of considered the same? There is sort of an argument that the position, at least with Gorsuch's last ruling on this, that you can kind of interpret it to be that they are sort of considered the same in the sense of the case was the Grimm case was about bathrooms, and the point that was made was, well, if you have to treat people of different sexes equally, you can't punish somebody for doing something that another sex could do, which is use whichever bathroom, right? And so that was the argument that was made, and you couldn't use this argument to, I mean, quite literally, just draw a complete one-to-one on gender and sex. Now, that being said, just because something is a protected class does not necessarily mean that there can't be overwhelming reasons why you can't discriminate, right? One of them can discriminate based on gender. Obviously, you have to have some kind of justification for it, but especially with sports or strip clubs or really anything like that, there's I think
I was abandoned the
overwhelming
women's
reason.
gyms.
There's an absolutely like overwhelming reason to a justifiable reason to have it gender segregated or sex segregated or whichever one you choose. So one question I had for you, pondering, and this is, I guess, to anybody who's, I guess, more concerned about the outcome than they are concerned about the process. Let's say, hypothetically, Trump were to get elected next time around, and then immediately he put forward a policy of, look, we're going to withhold Title IX funds for any state that allows transgender athletes to compete. Would you be pissed at just the fact that the outcome of transgender people not being able to compete in certain sports? Like, would you be pissed about that? Or would you be kind of doubly pissed at that? And also the fact that, you have this president here who's, really undercutting states that, the people who live there think it's not, think it is fair, or think it's not fair to have this policy.
No, I mean, listen, the fact of the matter, I wouldn't be pissed that President Trump, unless the courts say otherwise, would be availing himself of a perfectly legal carrot and stick approach that presidential administrations have used against since time immemorial. That's the way our current system is set up. Is Congress designs legislation, but the federal government under the executive branch, like for example, when we talk about drug legislation, the FDA is the one that like handles the vast majority of drug-related policy in the United States, or like the Labor Department handling the vast majority of like labor policy. So basically, the legislature provides the broad policy, and then it's the executive branch which interprets and creates the rules and does the vast majority of the work on a day-to-day basis. So if President Trump availed himself of a legal option to threaten Title IX funds against states that had a policy outcome that he didn't like, I would hate that, but it would be because of the outcome. He would be employing a perfectly valid tactic that I am aware of. I just wouldn't like the outcome because it would be for a bad or nefarious purpose. And Trump has threatened to do so in the past. So that's why I'm not persuaded by like what Flotrace was saying earlier. This will only embolden Republicans to do this if Biden does it. Well, they've done it already. And this isn't like a turn-based RPG where Democrats have to act first in order for Republicans to misbehave. They'll do it whenever it's convenient for them. So the alternative is that just Biden sits on his hands and doesn't avail himself of a tool that Republicans have and will avail themselves of in the future.
I think that the main disagreement, we probably don't actually disagree on the logic too much. Besides, I think that generally speaking, anything that, absent some kind of good reason to, like I said, which I think there are situations like we saw in New York with guns, but absent some kind of good reason, generally speaking, federalism is a good thing. States being able to, the closer the locus of control is to the population that lives there, generally is better than the alternative. So, absent some kind of good reason, I'd want to see states be able to do what they want to do and to not have the federal government intervene. But I think,
Sure.
but there are cases in which I will say, like, yeah, rights are being violated to the extent where the feds have to get involved.
Right. Like I
think
imagine President Lincoln is a hero of yours, even though he violated states' rights
Absolutely.
all the time. Yeah.
Well, there's actually an argument that the Confederacy was more pro-federalist than the Union, but that's a whole different argument.
We can get into that's another topic.
That's
I do
after-
want to ask
It's
a
whole
question.
different argument.
I do want to ask a question because, and specifically to pondering here, you have appealed several times to, well, it's legal, right? Under what conditions would a politician be able, or would a politician using or leveraging a legal avenue that they have, a legal tool, under what conditions would it become so egregious that you would advocate for changing the legality of that tool, where it has been abused to such a degree where you can no longer tolerate this rule being in the hands of anyone, right? And you just
taking it off the board.
Taking it off
That's
the board.
tough.
Yeah.
That's tough because I don't even advocate, like a big one that many people advocate that it be taken off the board entirely is the filibuster, that we should abolish the filibuster. But I'm a firm believer that the filibuster has been employed many times successfully for, again, morally righteous causes, very often by Democrats, right? Democrats employed the filibuster throughout the Trump administration to stop Trump multiple times.
Yeah.
How convenient.
So I don't even advocate for abolishing the filibuster. I certainly advocate for making it harder because Republicans are just so quick to use it, and it puts the burden on the non-filibustering party when the burden should always be on the filibustering party. So I don't know, to answer your question. It would have to be pretty egregious, and it would have to be done in a way that the Democrats couldn't wield the tool effectively. Like there would have to be a political tool that Democrats couldn't use effectively for good purposes, that Republicans could use effectively for bad purposes, and the only alternative would be to take the hammer, so to speak, off the table entirely.
Real quick,
So I don't know.
I think it would help to kind of to point out how much money we're talking about being withheld from the states in terms of percentage of their total budgets for education and operating expenses. The federal government's contribution to the state's education budget's approximately 8%. And the rest of it is made up of the state and local government's budgets. It's not like we're talking about a level of absolute power here that's going to devastate the communities and the educational systems where that budget's going to be potentially withheld. I think that if you're willing to enact legislation that is really, really aggressive in nature, targeting a marginalized community, you should be pretty cognizant of the fact that there is at least some level of financial risk in doing so. And it seems like this is both well within the executive authority of the president to do, and it's something that I think is perfectly justifiable within the framework of, like we were talking about, adopting transgender protection into Title IX. But it's 8% of the budget. So are we really talking about an absolute kind of power or authority? I don't think so.
This only targets like 1% of the population, though, right? Like it's a small number. Small percentages is small, right? What's this argument? I don't understand.
I
think
that would
No.
dollars
different from people. That's a
It
big,
could
that's a
absolutely
hugely
decimate
different
certain school
argument when you're
districts that
talking
are
about the level of
notoriously
power
strapped
dollars.
for funding. To be clear, I do think 8% absolutely could be a lot, especially depending on which school district you're talking about and how that then how those are doled out from one state to another. Okay, well, I think it very reasonably could be very impactful.
If there was no impact at all, we wouldn't be talking about this.
Okay, well,
it's meant to have some
it seemed to me
impact.
that your argument
respectfully,
was
I think it could be
trying to downplay
decisive.
the
I am
impact,
with
and I
flow
think it
trace
could
there.
be very impactful. And I think the core of the argument, though, sort of whether or not the impact is big or small, is about quote one of my favorite movies, escalation. The question is, if we do this, are Republicans going to do it? Republicans going to become worse? And I think the trouble that we're having, pondering, Josiah, is that Republicans are bad. I super agree, but it's a linear impact, not a binary one. I think they could be a lot worse. There's and I think there's really good evidence for this when you look at how Trump tries to do things. We talk a lot about Trump has said he wants to do this, but a lot of times he doesn't. And the reason why is because when Trump wants to do things, he has to start relying on people that aren't Trump. And a lot of those Republicans, though I disagree with them, I might even think some of them are bad people, a lot of those Republicans are a lot more reasonable. For example, in the election stuff in particular, we saw time and time again where Trump got blocked by his own guys to the point where he was trying to install cronies. That culture, a culture of norms, is the reason why that kind of stuff exists. And if we erode at that, I think it's very dangerous at opening up.
Dude, he literally obstructed the relief funds for COVID in Democratic states, like the release of relief funds for Democratic states in COVID. That money didn't start actually coming out in earnest until the Biden administration took over the overseeing of it. It was deliberately mishandled to the point that it was withheld from states that were perceived to be political opponents of Trump. Trump declined the federal request for aid from the state of California after the wildfires.
Yeah.
This was something
it's not responsive. The question
these were dramatically worse deployments of the exact same tactic done underhandedly by the previous administration. You're acting like this is an escalation and not a pretty moderate comparative response.
The problem is that it doesn't matter what reality is; it matters what people think reality is. And the question is whether or not it would be perceived and used as justification. Ultimately, whether or not Republicans are or are not justified, the question is: would there be worse abuses by Republicans?
Saying a bunch of things that are helping to propagate a false reality.
No, it doesn't. No, you have to meet people where they are, right? And at the end of the day, if whether or not Republicans are justified or not, if it is true that Republicans after this are going to become much worse, so much worse that the cons outweigh the pros, then that's something we have to contend with. Now, whether or not that is the problem, case, that's fair. But whether or not Republicans are justified in then creating those bad sides, that doesn't matter ultimately to the question of whether or not we should do it.
Flo, so this is the issue, and this goes back to, we talked about this a bit in Milwaukee when we were canvassing, which, by the way, we can't. Flo Trace did that. We helped save democracy with the Wisconsin election. I know Lactoid was super happy about that outcome. Just want to throw that out there. It was a great time.
Great job, guys.
So,
hell yeah.
Flo, here's the thing, though. Okay, so Portland he gave a few examples, and I believe there are even more, again, of times the Trump administration either threatened or did, in effect, delay or cause complications with the rollout or dispensation of funds based on selfish, spiteful politics. So let's just accept that at face value that it did happen, okay? Now, I take your point that, simply because those things happen, people still may perceive that this would be an escalation by Democrats. And I agree, people would perceive this as an escalation by Democrats. But this speaks to the fundamental asymmetry that, with respect, you help contribute towards when you prop it up. The fact of the matter is, we do have a political asymmetry here, which essentially grades Republicans on a curve. They can say or do the most underhanded shit imaginable, and Democrats have to be, it's the Michelle Obama ethic, when they go low, we go high. We have to stop doing that. In this case, Biden would be morally justified. He would not only have the law on his side, because presidents' executive orders have the full force of law, number one. Number two, he would be morally justified because it would be for a righteous cause, protecting more.
Resi, I'm going to let you go right next, but I want to pin that for later because I have questions on it. Resi, continue, please.
Okay, so I think that what you guys are describing is, hey, it's morally justified that he does this, right? Which means that we're going to have escalation. We're going to have another escalation after this. At some point, the Republicans are going to take back power again. I think that the only way we can actually guarantee this and, help our trans, fellows and whatnot, right? The only way we're going to do that is by depowering the executive branch and the judiciary branch and vaulting the legislative branch, right? This is all the federal government. I wanted to correct Portland about this earlier. The legislative branch is the federal government, right? It's all the federal government. I'm just saying that if we want to actually see things that, stay and stick and whatnot, we need to work through the legislative branch. This is the basis that we can't, just go back on. Executive orders are out of control. We are creating mad king presidents, and we're just going to have more mad kings. They're going to get worse and worse, and it's just going to be like, okay, cool. Every 4 years, we flip flop between whatever position we have. We need
Hold on.
to make
Okay.
solutions that help us in the long term, not within the short term.
Okay. Can I respond to that? I don't want to cut you off, but I think
here's
that
my
it's
statement.
reasonable to question whether any given exercise of like federal or executive authority is over the line. I think that it's foolish to say that this tool that is available and recognized as like legally viable should not be used under any conditions because it can be optically spun as an escalation in tactics, when in reality, Biden has issued fewer and less impactful executive orders than Trump. He has undone some of the executive orders that Trump put into place, but a lot of those policies remained, and he has been a lot less breakneck in his upheaval of the prior administration's policies than you would think based on the way that the media and conservative institutes have broadcasted.
Could Resi clarify?
I would absolutely like to agree to this and respond to Portland, because I agree with this, right? But the reality is the base root of this comes down to the fact that executive orders are overriding legislative law. We can look at Palestine, Ohio, East Palestine.
East
right?
Palestine.
I guess, right? I
East.
didn't write notes on this part, right? Where it was an executive order that changed the way that we put trains out there, how we inspect them, and those rules, right? Which overrode legislative law. Why the hell is just a mad king able to tell the will of the people that we can't do this? Why are we giving up the power that you and I hold to one singular person or a group of 9 unelected peoples who have no reason to even listen to us in the first place?
Well,
Why
Lactoid's
are
the
we
attorney
giving up
here.
power
Hang on real quick. I got a couple of questions. Lactoid's the attorney here, so he'd have to clarify. My understanding is executive orders have the full force of law, but they can't override statutory law or congressional legislation. And I'm unaware of the East Palestine situation where that happened, number one. Number
the
two,
deregulation thing.
Yeah, deregulation.
But I'm unaware of where an executive order overrode legislation. I understand where an Obama-era executive order was slow-walked and then repealed during the Trump administration, but that wasn't a matter of presidential executive order versus congressional law, again, as far as I'm aware, but that's a different topic. Number two, if Resi could just clarify, in terms of like this tool and walking it back, are you saying that executive orders shouldn't exist, or that I don't understand, like, in terms of like concrete policy proposals or action, what you mean?
A concrete policy would be this: if an executive order is put out there, right, it has to go ahead and at some point be voted on by the legislature, be proven constitutional by the judiciary. So that way we aren't just having executive orders that go out, change the entire fundamental way that we look at the nature of our country, right? And do something there rather than an executive order going out, the legislature, which again is in gridlock and whatnot, not being able to respond to it because they just aren't, right? Like, have something there that actually allows for that power to go ahead and be returned to the people's houses.
I respectfully submit that I agree, and I think most people would agree that the scope of executive orders has broadened immensely. But executive orders existing, I mean, there's a reason they exist, because they are a practical tool. In order for executive agencies to function, executive orders have to exist too, because again, Congress passes legislation, but they're not policy experts. They don't preside over the day-to-day administration or enforcement of these laws. And executive orders essentially allow the president to do that with the full force of law, but still being subordinate to congressional law and statutory law, right? Like, the president can't just like write a piece of paper that overrides Congress. Now, Congress may cowardly choose to not challenge a presidential executive order when they have the right to, but that's on Congress's fecklessness. I don't think it's possible for the executive branch to function without.
Can I ask a question of the panel?
I think that the legislative branch is being subjugated by the judiciary branch.
I want to get a read of the room here, because I'm not sure. So if you think that executive orders today, as they are used today, are overused, Raise your hand.
Sure.
So
When you,
most
say, when you say
people.
today, you're referring to
like
because
in modern modern
Sure.
politics, right?
Okay.
Previous 10
Yeah.
years.
So
Is that good?
still
Yeah.
and so about 5 of them. Okay. Portland, you don't? You think that's fine?
I think that there's no point in trying to determine exactly how many is like good and how many is bad.
I'm
I
just
think
asking
that
your
if the
opinion.
tool exists, then we should look for our presidents to try to enact the will of the people within their power via those tools. And if that's what's happening via executive orders, I don't care if there's a fucking million of them. But if they're not,
Interesting.
if they're used to wield the presidential authority in a way that I think doesn't reflect the will of the people, then yeah, I mean, I would, on an individual basis, contest those decisions.
The executive is fundamentally not made to execute the will of the people. The executive is made to execute the will of the legislature.
The reason that we empower an individual to wield power that's disproportionate to any other like state or body in some areas is because we've kind of entrusted them with a level of like dedication to the public good that we understand needs to be effectively able to be exercised in some meaningful way. The president can't just be a figurehead that like signs bills when they get to the desk. They need to have things like veto power and executive authority to have any function in the real world whatsoever. And I think that's okay.
They can have some function, but I think the question of executing on the will of the people is sort of begging the question. What the will of the people is not a clear thing. It's a complicated thing. Even if Democrats had 100 seats in the Senate, there would still be disagreements. There would still be questions about what is the best way to represent that. So having a process to formulate that with different people representing it, like we have in the legislature, I think is a really good thing. To put it all in the hands of the president, in terms of the authority, I think you end up missing a lot of that. And I think that's fundamentally the problem. There's a lot less recourse as well for individual representatives and for stuff like that.
Well, as Wick said, I mean, the premise of this entire panel is and I would say that it's not even a hypothetical premise. It's simply until the courts say otherwise, there's a rich body of lore, so to speak here. This is well within the president's purview. And for the premise of this panel, we've accepted that as just a matter of fact.
It is. I agree the president can do it. What I'm saying is that regardless of whether or not the end is a good one, the effect in and of itself is bad. I think you get a better representation of the will of the people when you're going through executive orders as opposed to the legislature. I think the reason why... Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say respectfully, let me ask you something. Biden doesn't do this. Biden chooses not to do this. He decides not to make, federal funds conditional. He doesn't, try to mess with Title IX at all to protect trans people. Do you really think that the next Republican president won't avail themselves of this type of executive order or something like it to benefit a policy outcome that they want, even if it's incredibly unpopular, it's incredibly discriminatory, whatever? Do you really think that this would dissuade them from doing that? Because I don't see it.
I don't think it's going to stop them from doing it, but I think it's going to be less bad. I think it's not an appealing argument, but I think it's a question of degrees, and I think the degree would be worse in a world where we do this. And that delta, that increasing of the badness, outweighs the goodness that we can gain right here.
Let me hang on, real quick. I'm sorry, real quick.
I want to add on to this. I couldn't give a fuck less if Republicans are going to do worse. It's bad policy to begin with to work through this.
Okay, so your basic issue though is just with like the existence of executive authority that supersedes the state's legislative bodies, right? Or like supersedes
like
the legislature in any way.
Legislative bodies.
This much, I think, yeah. Like there's some amount of executive authority. I'm sure Reservoir is okay with.
I want to finish up Portland, but after Portland and you're back and forth, I want to get Staxium's in. He's been trying.
Low Trace
and then Lactoid.
I don't think answer the question earlier that I posed about whether you think trans people should be considered as like that gender and sex should be separated and like considered separate in respect to Title IX.
I support that.
So you don't have any problem with the outcome of the action. You actually think that it's a good action, but you think that it should be done through
the outcome in this specific thing. Because I think there are other outcomes later, but yes.
Well, the outcome. Think about the outcome there. That's what the question I was leading to, Flo. This is where I'm kind of confused because you again, with respect, you conceded that it probably won't stop the next president, Republican president, from using this tool or something like it to affect a policy outcome that's either discriminatory, unpopular, or both. And I assume, given that you're a staunch supporter of God Emperor Biden, that you are pro-trans rights. So in the absence of this pressure from the federal government, that means discriminatory laws in red states will go into effect. So so it wouldn't stop Republicans from doing something bad, and it will.
Not
and
quite. I think it
Biden
would
not
stop
doing this will
Republicans from doing something worse. I think
And wha-
Republicans, yes, I think the abuse of this kind of stuff is a question of degrees. It's not a question of they abuse it or they don't. And I think the abuse would be worse.
But-
and that uniqueness of the extra worseness on top of it potentially could outweigh the benefits we have to gain here. Because I also don't think we have a lot of benefits to gain here.
But your way will
Yeah.
cause red state legislatures to pass anti-trans bills, which will hurt trans people, and it won't deter the next Republican president from doing what you don't want Biden to do. Those are two bad outcomes.
Do you think it's going to stop them from just real quick? Stop! Because I have a question. Do you think this will fundamentally stop red states from passing this?
No.
I'm sorry.
No.
Sorry. Could you repeat that?
Do you think that Biden withholding federally funds from the states that pass this legislation? Do you think this will stop the red states from passing this legislation?
I think that it will put pressure on them. Yes. I
No,
don't know.
do you think
I don't
it
know
will
what the
stop
outcome
them?
will be? But
It will
I could see it.
require that they revisit the exact restrictions entailed in those policies, because let's not forget that Biden's Biden's recommendation here does not remove their ability to segregate trans people or put trans people in their gendered or sex categories. They just have to place reasonable restrictions. There are all kinds of ways. That's why some trans rights organizations have already criticized this is not extreme enough. They don't think that it goes far enough because it doesn't actually.
Two things before we go on. Well, the first thing, someone actually paid me money for, so I'm going to do it. Capitalism based. Okay, mood it. $10 to say, should the president be allowed to create and execute an order based on a policy that even the scientific community is undecided on to some extent? Where would the lines be drawn regarding funding? So we could talk about that if you guys want. But my second thing is, I think that if you think this will stop red states from passing this kind of legislation, that's just fundamentally not where the incentives lie. Again, the first and foremost thing that a politician wants to do is get reelected. And especially in these states, it is the will of the people in these states that these bills go through. I agree, but it is. And so again, this won't stop it. It will, the only potential outcomes here are bad. If we're looking at through that lens,
it could be less harmful, though. It could be less materially harmful. Like Portland said, it could cause them to revisit this legislation to make a more tailored approach in order to avoid that 8% federal funding. And this is just in the Title IX, the specific Title IX example that we're talking about, absent the broader question. And harm reduction's a valid principle worth pursuing.
But in that same respect, in the same way that yes, it's not likely to completely put a stop to it, but it could make it better. That's the same case I'm making on the other end. I'm making the case that yes, if we don't do this, no, we're not going to stop Republicans from being dirtbags. But I promise you, Ruminate, instead of being a level 70 dirtbag, they're going to be a level 65 dirtbag. And those 5 levels aren't a lot, but it is something. And given the fact that then the benefit we're getting is not stopping this, and I think actually, I think that's way too much credit to even say that it's going to be less. And I think this is going to make Republicans double down. I think that we're actually getting very less. Very little. The question is the juice worth the squeeze? I think we're squeezing really hard for almost no juice.
A few things. Yeah, sorry. A few things that I want to say. The first is mostly to Wick's point about the will of the people. I think that it's really fair to say that red states only exist because this is the will of the people. A lot of them are really terrified of, as they see it, the chemical castration of children. But I think that restricting federal aid is a measure of degrees. And once you start doing that, maybe a few people are like, you know what, maybe I actually didn't care that much about this issue. Maybe I care more about our funding and can push these politicians to actually start reducing these regulations and start opening up trans-affirming healthcare. Yeah.
Oh, if you're not done, continue. Sorry.
There is already massive contempt for educational institutions that are in red states to begin with. So threatening to defund
Republicans are just going to thank us.
Aren't going to be something that these red states are going to respond to within their electorates. Right? They aren't going to give a shit if a college gets less money. They already think the college educated are the literal enemy, right? Those dang liberals taking their kids, turn them into lefty commie fascists and shit, right? Like that's
I don't-
literally
I
how
don't
they
think they
view
are.
this. This isn't
I-
like a power of the person.
Shut up, Lacto.
Let's get Lactoid in here a bit, because I know he's been trying. So go ahead. You gotta throw some more bows, buddy.
Yeah, listen, this is a lot of this is just like Republican bashing and electoral strategizing, which isn't. I don't think that's particularly interesting, and I don't think it's actually like the point of the underlying question. Because even if it is the case the Republicans did it or would do it, that's not really pertinent to whether or not it should be done or whether or not Biden should do it here. And I think Rez is actually 100% on point with that criticism. In my view, there's only two ways to approach this, right? This is a topic of federalism, and perhaps after we've established some kind of ground there, getting under like the underlying policies to see like, are these policies good enough, and are the restrictions coercive or too coercive to justify either doing it or not doing it, right? So we do value federalism, right? In the case that Portland mentioned before, one of the criteria that is used when it comes to the federal government being able to do this, there are certain restrictions, right? Generally, the federal government can withhold certain funds, but there is a fourth criteria which specifically says, look, the 10th Amendment prohibits the federal government from commandeering state or local governments by requiring them to carry out federal programs, right? The Supreme Court in that case was skeptical and worried about the fact that, yes, like we're going to allow it sometimes and somewhat arbitrarily, right? We're going to allow it sometimes. But at the same time, if we let the feds do this every fucking time, we don't even have federalism anymore. What's the point of having 50 states? If every single time this state doesn't do what I want, well, we're just going to cut off your funding, right? You're going to do exactly what we want. Otherwise, you're done. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And sometimes even just by executive order, not even by the federal legislator deciding this. Like this is like by some by executive order, basically combating federalism. So, I mean, before we go towards like, whether or not the Stop Woke Act, whether or not that's bad enough to like undermine federalism, I don't see why it would be. Like, can we at least admit that there is like a problem here if under a federalist system, if having 50 states doesn't mean anything, if we can just like take money from them, make them dependent on the federal funds, and then cut them off when they don't do what we want, right? I mean, that to me seems like direct coercion.
Well, the state is coercion.
wait.
Let's just be real. But I think the point you're making about bad
I
outcomes
completely
is true.
agree. That's a good point. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, in for a penny, in for a pound is my view on it. But
Does nobody
So
here have
make it
any
more coercive
criticism
until-
of federalism as like a governmental ideology and the way it's created such disparate political and social and socioeconomic climates from state to state? Like personally, I don't like that I can accidentally end up a few miles over the Idaho border and be thrown in jail for having a gram of weed. Personally, I think that there are a lot of issues with having such like polarizing laws in states that share borders, and that seems to contribute a lot to like the cultural divisiveness that we see more and more going forward. I know a lot of my neighbors in this area in the in 2021 and 2022, they moved out of this area to conservative states where they felt they'd be more like at home politically and ideologically. And I think that we're creating a progressively widening climate between the states.
But
Wait,
I think just
want to address one point that was made. I think that the example of weed is actually a particularly poor example, because it's actually reinforcing the concept of states' rights, because the federal government has illegalized in Schedule 1 marijuana, right? And it was actually Colorado and a number of other states over time which have basically been advocating, look, we have our own states. Yeah, we have our own states. So fuck you. You shouldn't be able to like come tell us what to do in our area. That seems reasonable to me in the process. I think Colorado should be able to have weed be legalized, despite the federal government having it, the DEA having it illegal.
Yeah, so personally, I mean, for me personally, I don't want to litigate, the pros and cons of federalism, because that's not the topic of the panel. I agree with you that broadly I support federalism, but in terms of,
Do you?
I do, right? Because but the fact of the matter is, like every system, it's imperfect, and the fact of the matter is that our system of federalism imbues the president with the power to draft executive orders and enforce them.
Pondering. Can you give me one example of like a Democrat policy that if it was enforced this way, you'd be like, fuck that, I'm not supporting it enforced that way?
Enforce what way? By executive order?
By executive order, basically saying like if
The
the
states
states,
can't disagree.
if the states don't comply with this Democrat policy, we're cutting off all your funding. So like, let's say tomorrow, Biden's like, okay, every state that doesn't have abortion legal, they're losing their Medicaid funding. They're losing
No, I
those
definitely
block
wouldn't support that, because Medicaid in particular, I mean, you would be punishing the
Going
entire
nuclear.
state for in terms of withdrawing their health care for particular policy outcomes. So it would have to be a case by case basis.
They're not
I'm
surrendering their
sorry.
Medicaid money. That's not what's going to happen. They're going
Say
to
what?
have to legalize it. They're not going to give up their Medicaid money. That's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is, look, you lose the Medicaid money, or you lose some other like massive amount of money unless you.
No, I'm
legalize
saying
abortion.
that with
They're
that
all gonna
withdrawing
legalize
the
abortion.
Medicaid, that withholding Medicaid funds I would not support that, because the state needs Medicaid funds in order to fund. I don't understand why.
Here's what I'm getting frustrated, because I feel like you're dodging the point a little bit. So again, you're going back to like the consequences. What I'm trying to like get at is, you say you value federalism in of itself. What I'm asking you is there a Democrat policy that if using executive order was coerced upon the states, if they were saying, look, you states, you're not going to get funding unless you do this, is there any Democrat policy that, if done that way, you would say, I can't support that? That flies in the face of federalism. That flies in the face of states' rights. Like, we should have 50 states.
This doesn't violate federalism, though. The court. That's where I'm confused.
Is there any Democrat policy where, if done this way, you would not support it?
Again, I'm struggling with the question, because when you're saying done like this, we don't know that this violates federalism.
Yeah, you're begging the question because
Yeah,
you're saying
I'm-
that it violates federalism, but you're not. We haven't established that it violates federalism.
Sure. So what I'm saying is that, okay,
You know what would violate federalism?
What I'm
The
saying
president
federal.
declaring martial law and saying that abortion is legal in all 50 states, and if any state attempts to outlaw abortion, that he would federalize the National Guard and send in troops. I would not support that.
Here,
That's
let me
not
explain
this.
Let me explain this. Here, when I'm using the word federalism, what I'm trying to define is the concept of split governance between the states and the federal government. The 10th Amendment, right? And back to the fourth clause that I read it before, which is the federal government should not be able to commandeer the states to carry out their will, right? My question for you is, let's say the federal government decides to take taxes from all the citizens of the different states, and then what it says is, okay, in order to get this policy done, in all these states, you have to do this, otherwise you don't get the money. Okay. Is there any, you have to do this? Is there any Democratic policy, if Biden pushed it, is there any platform policy point of the Democratic Party that, if pushed this way, you would say that's a violation of states' rights? It looks to me like they're commandeering the states by withholding this money. Do you think, or do you think like withholding money is just always justified?
No, it's not always justified. It would have to be litigated by the courts. That's what I'm saying. Like, you are begging the question here,
I'm
Lactor.
not begging the question. I'm asking, in your opinion, under what circumstance would it go too far? Like, what policy position?
Not legal. He's not asking for a legal answer. He's not asking. It's just he's not asking for a legal. This isn't a legal question. This is
not legal, right? We're talking about specifically for
this
you.
specifically, yeah, for you specifically, where you would say, "Yo, I know that's legal, but damn," right?
Yeah, that's fucked. I don't support that because of the way it was done. Is there anything?
Oh no, if it's legal, it's a perfectly valid tool. As long as I agreed with a particular outcome, I wouldn't have an issue with it. But if it's legal, but Lactoid, here's where you're missing it. If it's legal in our system, it's a product of federalism.
So what I would say is that if it is legal, laws,
in our federalist society,
yeah, I understand it's legal, right? Sometimes, there's certain cases in which it's not. If it's common during the state to fulfill certain objectives.
In which case it would not be legal.
In which case it would not be legal, of course. But I think the question is, I think what the discussion is, if we just want to talk about like what the law is, that's one thing, right? We just do whatever legal. But I think the more interesting question is, what should the law be in order to preserve certain things that we value? And if I value federalism on a country sense, and I value the idea of states being able to have some level of control within their borders, what should the law be to not overstep this and allow the federal government to just do this for everything?
To answer your question,
highways, if they're going to do it for education, if you don't if you don't allow trans athletes to compete, which is an incredibly controversial issue.
We're stun locked on this a bit. We're stun locked on this. I'll give you one more chance. I will give you one more chance to answer pondering, and then I want to go to Resi. Okay.
Well, to answer your question, to be very clear, I support President Biden availing himself of any or every legal tool. So again, this is assuming that this is legal to push a democratic policy, even against recalcitrant states. 100%.
That's fair.
But I would accept that that's part of the federalist system anyway, because it would be legal in a federalist system.
Except for the Medicaid part with the abortion, because you're worried that if they actually call the bluff, or not the bluff, if they actually say, look, we're not going to take the Medicaid funds, then you'd be worried about.
Well, yeah, also like you're the lawyer here, so you'd have to clarify. But like FEMA funds or like federal emergency funds, I would also have a problem with that too. Like if a hurricane hit Florida or whatnot, and it's like, hey, if you don't legalize abortion, we're not going to provide federal funds to help disaster relief. That'd be pretty fucked too. I wouldn't support that.
Yeah, I think that's the key. It's not just a question of the policy; it's a question of the stick as well. Like it changes. Like just real quick, the exact reverse. Lactoid. I'm sure if we said, oh, Biden's only going to be withholding $1 per state, you'd probably be like, okay, this is so little funding that I would probably be okay with this for anything, right? Like the funding that's being held up as the enforcement mechanism, that matters just as much as the policy that is being pursued as well. And the question of whether or not we would accept the given situation.
Resi, go ahead.
All right, so I want to do a quick reframe. All right, you guys are familiar with the Tennessee 3, right? I'm asking, is who here is familiar with Tennessee expelling legislation?
It was the black lawmakers.
Yes,
right?
yes. Sorry, I am familiar.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, so the Tennessee 3. So one thing that came out of the Speaker of the Tennessee House after Nashville and Nashville and the other district that I can't remember the name of right now, went ahead and reinstated both Justin Jones and Justin Pearson's. They said that they were going to defund those districts from state funds. Would you guys be opposed to that? Because I think that's like a direct corollary here in terms of like how power balances work between both, within just a state itself, as well as from the federal to the state. And what would be the difference between those two?
Yeah, I would oppose that. But I think
what is different between that in the state and then between the executive?
As far as I know, they're both legal. Somebody would have to let me know. So I would accept the legality of threatening to defund Nashville because they reinstated those two gentlemen. The reason I would oppose it is because it's a bad outcome. It's morally bad to punish Nashville for correctly reinstalling those two legislators who were kicked out because of Republican bias and corruption in the first place.
Okay.
Is it a bad outcome to kind of subsume the states into federal policy like over time? Do you think like denigrating the states' rights is a bad policy in the long run, or do you think it's not really that important?
I don't know. So to me, again, states' rights are it's kind of like, I mean, not to appeal to the Civil War, but we saw a situation where states' rights is kind of a classic example. I think the Union was well within its moral rights to subsume and to violently take back and suppress the exercising of the Confederate states' rights. So states' rights, to me, they can be used for good purposes and for bad purposes. And when states are used for bigoted, discriminatory, to affect bigoted or discriminatory outcomes, then I support a federal government trying to curb that. It really does. It's case-by-case basis.
I don't really think that the Civil War is a good example here, because I think that's just simply the federal government acknowledging the fact that they had spent money on these states and everything like that, that then went ahead and created an oppositional government, right, to oppose that, right? But creating an oppositional government that not only was just kind of separating off, but also incurring violence upon the North in the same round. I don't believe that these are actually corollaries.
Sure, but even the antecedent events as well. I mean, the part of the reason that the Civil War broke out was because of pressure from the Union states, basically through legislative and executive action, restricting the rights of the what would eventually become the Confederate states.
The formation of the Confederacy was because of the
I
Union
wanna.
doing that.
I
The
think we're
start of the
getting.
Civil War was because
We don't need to go back this far.
attacking
Yeah.
the Union.
We don't need to go back this far, gang. Let's
We
need to go
begin.
back
Make it happen.
further.
Well,
Actually,
I think the
It's
only
I'm sorry, I'm gonna challenge examples.
No, I understand. Fair enough. I'm just. I wanna combo break this a little bit, and it's wild to me, and I'm curious if Staxiums and Portland, I'm asking you two specifically, also have this this view, which it seems to be Biden can use every and any legal means necessary to enforce his will, and that's okay. Do we think that's okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we care about checks and balances, which it seems like we all do, I think having faith in the judicial system is part of those checks and balances. So the legal part, I think that we're brushing past that word, but that's everything to me. If we feel like it's about outcome, let's set the judicial system on top of it. And if they feel like it's not okay, then the judicial system rules it as illegal, and it's no longer okay.
Yeah, follow-up question to you then.
Yeah.
Do you think that there are any laws that are fundamentally immoral, that are federal laws currently in place today that are fundamentally immoral?
Yes, I could probably think of some.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Just want to let that hang then. Portland, same question to you.
I mean, yeah, there are like logical limits to what I would endorse the
what are they?
For. Like if you wanted to put litter boxes in every room, in every classroom, and that was part of Title IX protection for gender identity, I would have a little bit of an issue there. I would say, like,
That's
no, I think
litter boxes in classrooms. We put litter boxes in classrooms in case kids are getting shot up so they can piss somewhere.
Okay, fine. If the litter boxes are made of bulletproof material that can be used to shield at least one child in the event of a mass shooting, that's fine.
Kids need to pee.
Why is that too far?
You're going to get problems health-wise. That's why we put litter boxes in classrooms, not for cat gender people.
You're disagreeing, I think, with the end, but the question is, the means? Would there ever be an end you agree with and a mean you don't agree with? That when you get conflict, you would choose the mean over the end.
I don't understand the question.
So I can let me try it. Let me try this. I can do something that is generally good. I can solve racism. Okay, I can solve racism. But in order to solve racism, I have to kill 100 children, right? But if I kill them, racism's solved. Okay.
Really, this is what you got.
That deal.
Okay, I assumed that there was a less dumb layer to this question I was missing when you guys tried.
You weren't getting it, so I'd made it as dumb as possible to speak your language.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to kill the 100 children, Wick. Jesus fuck.
Okay,
Portland.
So
Portland. What his question was originally?
That's a bargain deal.
His question was originally.
I might kill the kids, but I wouldn't want.
Hang on. His question was originally: is there anything that Biden could do that was legal, but you would not support the means by which he did it, even though it was legal?
I mean, yeah, sure.
Okay, can you give me an example?
What utility is there in giving you an example beyond
I'm
what
trying
I already
to find?
have? If you used executive authority to compel schools to put litter boxes in every classroom, yeah, I would think that was a bad use of your legal authority, and I would disagree with it. Holy shit, is that not a clear enough answer?
I don't get the.
I think kids should be allowed to pee.
Yeah, what's the litter boxes like? The litter box is a weird line it's just a weird line for you. So if that's your line, fair. It's just a weird
hypothetical lines. You haven't given me an example and asked yes or no. You've asked me to muse hypothetically about what I would and wouldn't agree.
What about the Medicaid abortion? What about the Medicaid abortion example?
I mean,
sure.
Withholding federal funds from states that banned abortion?
Yeah. All of Medicaid and Medicare.
I would not agree with that because the results would be disproportionately affecting people who haven't actually committed haven't had any ability to opt out of that system.
Do you think
the states aren't giving those funds up?
It would have a bunch of negative outcomes for a bunch of people that don't have any culpability in the matter.
I get you that the most
clear distinction from this conversation.
Just real quick, Lactoid, I get you that it's not likely to happen, but I'm curious. Do you not think that the 8% of funds that Biden is threatening to withhold here do you think that will only impact people who have the ability to opt out of the system? Do you think no one who doesn't have that ability will be affected?
No, I think that withholding 8% of funds from public schools that in those areas will probably have mixed outcomes. The ideal outcome is that it would compel those states to revisit those legislative, actions. And I think that if the intended goal is to compel the states to do that, then that's something that I can understand the mechanism being used for it. And again, I agree with the interpretation of Title IX, which is something that I can couch my reasoning in. It makes sense to me that trans people would be considered for this protection under Title IX. And the Department of Education announced their intention to implement these changes in fucking June. This isn't just a unilateral thing. So we're talking about it like it's some executive, like individual action. This was like put into place months ago via the mechanisms of the federal government that we all agree should exist on some level. So what's
and I think the Biden administration also paired it with like proposals for rules like that these red states could use as an alternative as well, which seems to be a good faith effort to try to thread both needles.
It is maximum charitability to all sides under consideration, with just the fact that like this is a clear interpretation of Title IX that includes trans people, like protections for trans people.
I need to ask a clarifying question real quick.
Sure.
When you're saying like prohibit, so when I looked it up, like Title IX was like, if you're not following Title IX, you're not eligible for federal funding, not just from like Title IX funds, but you're not eligible for like FAFSA money, right? You have to follow Title IX. And so, like, if is this what's going to be like withheld here? Is this what's threatened? Is it just like the grants that are given, or is it like in states in which they have these policies, you can't get FAFSA money? Is that the rule? I'm a little bit confused.
I thought it was a school by school basis that schools that violate the Title IX procedure would not receive federal funding. So
yeah,
like, that was
my understanding as well, that grants to schools would not be made available, but not that federal funding for programs students wish to participate in on an individual level would be withheld. Obviously,
maybe I'm wrong though.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a fucking lawyer, Lactoid. You are. If I'm wrong and it like merits additional consideration, and I would want to like reserve my opinion until I learn more about it.
Flowtrace is going to explode if he doesn't go.
Can I just say?
Can I just say? No, stop.
Cat box underneath his desk.
So I just want to say that don't listen to Portland. Your face is better than the drama llama, because now I can see when you're getting excited, and it's just better content. But go on with your question.
I think I can maybe bridge this gap on the hypothetical. Josiah, Portland, you both said that the reason why you wouldn't support the abortion example is because the impact of removing that Medicare funding would outweigh abortion, which I understand. I think it's a fair analysis. Does your answer change if, let's say, exact same hypothetical, except we know 100% the state is going to fold? There is actually no risk of them losing the Medicare funding. We're going to threaten that, and they're 100% going to fold. Would you still not support it? Would you say, well, no risk of that, so I'm okay with the method?
So the same hypothetical, it would have the same devastating effect, except we know that the states 100%. Would link and capitulate.
Yep. 100%.
Well, sure. Then yeah, because 100%. Because not only would it be legal, but the bad outcome would be avoided, and a good outcome would be effectuated. 100%.
That's a fair answer, Portland.
Okay.
What about
you? First of all, it's. I gotta step in because no, the bad outcome wouldn't be avoided. The immediate bad outcome would be avoided. The long-term bad outcome would absolutely be fallen into, and you would be like crushed. Like,
what's that bad outcome? What's that long-term bad outcome?
I looked it up, by the way.
Go ahead and go.
It's all federal funding, by the way. So
I know that question was given to Portland, but if Portland wants to answer, that's fine, and I'd go after. But
go ahead, Max.
Okay, yeah, I just have a question. This is mostly to Resi and Flo. Could you just outline a possibility of an outcome that the Republicans would engage in that they wouldn't right now? Because the most extreme example that I could think of just like a complete disregard of checks and balances made by the Republican Party would be to like the first thing that comes to mind is like, oh my God, what if they have a majority of the legislative branch and the executive power wants to put in like a specific judge and they just refuse it? Oh wait, they fucking already did that. Like, I can't think of an outcome that the Republican Party would engage in or would not engage in currently that would engage in if Biden did this. I don't know if we're grappling with the same Republican Party did.
No. So let's be honest. Let's not talk about Obama's cowardice and going ahead and actually executing on the law and not instituting a liberal court by going ahead and saying, oh, you're not going to vote on a Supreme Court justice? I can just appoint him. That would be legal. Obama was a coward. He was trying to do the positive thing, and then Trump got elected, and now we're where we're at.
Wait,
if we're
how-
gonna be looking at this
that's
from a
completely
Wait, I'm
no,
confused. How could he have
no.
appointed him?
It was cowardice. It was cowardice, and it was one of his greatest faults.
How
as a
was it
president,
coward?
Was
He
going
couldn't
ahead
have-
and supplanting. If we're going to pretend like Democrats are ever going to do this, right? Then we need to remember that they haven't, and that they're not going to, right? So I think that we need to delegitimize that power of the executive order because Democrats are cowards and they won't do it.
Rezi, how could he have appointed a Supreme Court
It's
justice?
literally no. How could he have appointed you if they refuse to vote on a Supreme Court justice? You can actually just appoint them through the executive.
Is that true?
No, you
Is
can't.
how that system works. No, that does work that way.
You absolutely
Mr.
cannot.
Lactoid.
Is the lawyer here?
Absolute
You can just
advice,
do that.
advice, and
Lactoid,
consent.
Lactoid, please.
That's in the
Yeah.
Constitution, Article
It
1.
seems
Well,
No,
well,
hell no.
we have a lawyer
Okay,
here,
it's
so Lactoid might
superseded,
know,
right?
because I don't know. I have no idea.
It's absolutely not true. There's no way that a president can unilaterally put a Supreme Court justice on the bench without Congress holding a hearing. Not possible.
I feel pretty confident with pondering, but let's even engage with the hypothetical that Obama just fucked that
Yes,
up.
let's
and could've
talk
done that
more about
regardless.
Narnia and
Public-
Middle Earth and other things that aren't real. Yes.
The Republican Party still went
Andor.
as extreme as they possibly could, and I don't like the example that was given was
Okay,
like, yeah,
okay.
they're like they're 82
Staxium. I'm going to answer your question with a real thing. The filibuster is a good example, right? When Trump wanted to get rid of the filibuster back in 2016, 2017, during a Republican-held Senate and Republican-held Congress, the Republicans told him, no, this is a bad idea. So again, Republicans have limits. Right? They have limits that they will not go past, right? Now it changes. Now they're kind of scummy in certain ways, but this idea that you have in your head, this like fanfic about Republicans
always be
doing
worse.
as evil as possible, as much as evil as possible as they could possibly do. Power. No, there are norms, right? As Mitch McConnell is a famously, right, strict to the norms. Now he'll be fucky wucky with it, right?
what?
Which isn't
Absolutely.
being strict to the
But-
norms.
Go ahead,
but
right?
if-
Now
if
that,
Democrats-
I've been told that I am living
Democrats-
in Narnia and Halo world, right? I do want to actually go ahead and point out that it is full. There is actually a constitutional argument that there is a.
Okay,
and this is-
I don't care about that. Okay, the Democrats.
Oh, so you're just
Constitutional
gonna let them get
argument.
a dunk on me, and I don't get
Yeah,
to
they just
No,
wanna
you
shit
can
on
give your
Republicans.
you can get no, you can
Gilliland,
get
and I don't get to say a word.
no, you get to say word after I get to say word. Then I'll toss it to you. But let me finish my fucking point. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
fine.
We're good. Okay, so
Okay, we're good.
again, if Democrats, right, had abolished the filibuster, right, then yes, Republicans would, the limits that they have would go out the door. I think that's absolutely true. This tit for tat thing, like again, we cannot, right, pretend that it can't be worse on the Republican side, because it absolutely could. And if we give them that excuse for their demons to come in, they will take it.
They've
Yes.
already built the narrative for the
I don't want
excuses
to
that they
toss it to
need.
Rezi.
I think that
So-
it's pretty. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, fair enough. So basically, how the actual language of this works within the Constitution, and this is a constitutional argument that I've seen that I somewhat agree with, is in full accord with traditional notions of waiver to say the Senate, having been given a reasonable opportunity to provide advice and consent to the president with respect to the Supreme Court nomination of Merrick Garland, and having failed to do so, could fairly be deemed to have waived its right. This is actually what it is. Ultimately, when we go ahead and put a Supreme Court justice up, we aren't asking for the Senate to confirm in such a way that they have to vote on it, but rather that they go ahead and consent to the justice that's being put forward. Them not voting on it could have been gone ahead and looked at as them waiving those lines of consent, which is something that could be argued. This is a constitutional argument that I would call Obama a coward for. Also, it allows me to be more bombastic, thus getting Wick more clicks whenever he does
Let's
go ahead
go.
and make
That was
weird-
eminently more reasonable than the initial bombastic claim. I'm
It's
sure there are some.
significantly more reasonable because I looked up the actual letter of the law. All right, let's go.
No, you look. This is an opinion from like a constitutional lawyer. Okay,
Yeah, I know.
I just
Yeah,
found
it's
the
an
exact
opinion.
website, right? And also the same website points out this would be a novel argument that appears to ignore the word consent.
Right,
Yeah,
and
it's
didn't
like,
was there?
but that's the thing. It's like this comes down to like the argument of like what consent.
Silence
under
is
law
consent.
needs to be
I love
given,
Silence
that.
is
right?
consent, apparently? Is that what that is?
Honestly, like
Somebody
if
clip
you've
that.
gone
Somebody clip
ahead and
Lactoid
kind of
saying
put
that right
things
now.
in front of
No.
you that you don't vote on. Yeah, I think that there is like some level of silence to consent, which doesn't go ahead and say that
That's
like
not
we're
how this
doing the
works.
stealthing debate right now, right? Because that's
Yeah,
a completely different layer.
no,
Consent
no,
under the
no,
law
no.
is
So-
significantly different than sexual
So,
consent.
so here's the thing. I want to address a couple of things here. First, Wick's point about McConnell, because on the
Yeah.
one hand, he said McConnell respects norms, and then 2 seconds later, then there are times McConnell doesn't respect norms. The Merrick Garland's a great example. He violated a norm by refusing to hold a Supreme Court hearing, created a new norm, which is that we don't have Supreme Court hearings during an election year,
And then
and then
violated
broke
the
his
norm.
norm in 2020. McConnell will break norms when it's convenient, and he supports norms when it's not convenient. So in the case of the filibuster, he had no reason to abolish the filibuster in accordance with Trump's rules. They passed the 2017 Tax Cut Act, which is what they wanted, and he was already cramming the federal judiciary with one conservative judge after another. Those are the two things McConnell cares about, and he didn't need to abolish the filibuster to do it. So why would he do it? Number one. Number two, Lactoid, as far as bashing Republicans, I hate to tell you, buddy, but this
hate
is a political
Republicans.
question, and your side
Don't
of
be
the aisle
bashable.
has created this mess. And I'm not going to pretend that that's
We're
not the
breaking laws.
case.
Oh, okay, hold on.
I'm not
hold
going to
on.
hold
So
Democrats.
we're-
Hang on, I'm not going to hold Democrats
Soon we're gonna be able
to
to
a
kiss.
higher standard when you won't hold Republicans to higher standards.
Okay,
If your
so-
side of the aisle cleaned up its act, then I wouldn't be advocating for Democrats to play by your rules.
Okay,
It's
so
your problem.
Okay, listen. If this is just what it's going to turn into, of like, well, we might have done the bad thing, but you guys did the bad thing first, so we get to do the bad thing now. It's like, no, like, just listen. Like, I'm not like defending any particular side. Okay, I'm not representing any particular side here. The question is, as presented to the topic, is should Biden do this? If the question was should Trump do this, I would have the exact same opinion. I'd be coming on here saying we should be really fucking careful about undermining federalism this way, and we gotta have a really fucking good reason to do it. And there's like there's a runaway problem here where, yeah, I think it would be incredibly fucky to be like, if you don't like, I think it was like suggested, if you don't like support our border policy, you're gonna lose this funding, right? Trump threatened that. That's insane. I think that's crazy. He should not have done that. And if you're just saying, well, you represent the Republican side, so we can do whatever the fuck. No, that's not how this works. But Biden
That's not just
fucking up by doing that.
This is what I wanted to put a
Someday
pin in, and I
Lactoid
want to
will
get
bring
back
you
to it
into
now
an
because it's
ad
come back up.
I'm
It's
so excited.
It's come back up. This concept of we should get away or do away with the concept of when they go low, we go high. Do we agree with that? Or is that just a pondering thing?
No. And, I think what Josiah is talking about is a little more sophisticated than what you're giving credit for, Lactoid. It's not a question of if you do a bad thing, we can do a bad thing. It's a question of a race to the bottom. If one side engages in a tactic that might be morally repugnant but gives them an advantage, the other there needs to be some way to stop that doesn't involve the other side doing that. Otherwise, they will, right? Like when we talk about like a race to the bottom in terms of like labor prices across the third world, right? The idea of whoever has the cheapest labor, they're going to get all of the manufacturing, and that leads to a race to the bottom, trying to get the manufacturing lower and lower. If there is a tactical advantage to abusing federal power like that, that needs to be curtailed in a way that doesn't involve, the other side doing it. Because if it is the case that, for example, Republicans can get wins by abusing federal power, Democrats really do, in a way, need to respond to that by doing it themselves.
Wait. Here's a great bridge then. Would you join me in support for establishing some kind of legislation or amendment to prevent this from happening from either side from doing it going forward, including Biden, which is the prompt?
Yeah, I think I would, yeah.
Victory again. W.
I'm reaching out my hand to you, brother.
To narco-communism. We're going for it, Black Toy.
Okay.
Don't
So-
let me hang in here.
So does
Other direction.
again?
Well, hang on, we
this-
didn't hear from Portland and Stacks,
Yeah,
my erstwhile
Portland-
allies. We'll
Portland-
see if they agree.
Honestly, I mean, my whole
okay, Stack
contention.
James, I guess.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, just go.
I
just
would-
go.
No, I'm sorry. Okay. My entire contention is legality, right? Like, and I do think that norms are really important. I think, I am that big fat liberal who believes in institutions. And if we find a way to legalize this, then I think that that's important. I am frustrated that Republicans feel like they can do almost anything without any restriction because they look to the Democrats and they're like, oh, look, there's no consequences for my actions because they're not engaging in the same tomfoolery. As soon as we get back in power, we'll just continue doing this fucking nonsense. I am so in favor of some sort of legal restrictions to really define the limits of the the executive branch. But until that time, I don't want to fucking engage with these stupid hypotheticals where we have to, for some reason, abide by things that aren't even laws that no Republican does.
You know why? You know why we have to do that? Because there are consequences. The Republicans got shellacked because they violated these things. Because
that's not why.
That is a fucking consequence. That is a fucking consequence. It absolutely is.
That's a big part of COVID mismanagement in the economy. That's why they got shellacked in 2020. And he put
shellacked in 2020. If we're looking at 2022, the Republicans going ahead and superseding the will of the people by going ahead and instituting the conservative judiciary that they have, thus politicizing the judiciary. They should have won by a fucking landslide for like the amount of problems that we were having economically. Like, conservatives are ending up losing this battle because they're going against these rules, and I think that is a good.
And when Democrats stop being the better party, when a voter cannot see the difference, and a lot of them can't already, but when more voters can't see the difference between Democrats and Republicans because they both do it, right? They both do it. Then, yeah, that's going to stop being a consequence. The reason we go high when they go low is because we win when that happens electorally.
I love how Michelle Obama said that, and then right after her husband's second term ended, a Republican president took office, the dumbest and most incompetent president in modern history. That is a refutation of Michelle Obama's ethic. When they go low, we go high. The lowest person got into the highest office in the land.
Yeah,
so three Supreme Court justices
that Hillary Clinton called half of the country deplorables who have no.
Yeah, we didn't listen to. That's why we lost because we didn't listen. We didn't listen to Michelle.
Think about
my queen.
Think about what you just said. Think about what you just said. All the stuff that Donald Trump has said and done. On one hand, Hillary Clinton one time said deplorable. And she loses that you just identified the asymmetry right there.
Okay,
beautifully.
Great.
Donald Trump can do 50,000 terrible things, but one Democrat says the wrong thing at the wrong time.
So are we not going to acknowledge the fact that she ignored the Midwest and everything, or are you just going to ignore
There's
that?
a lot of confounding factors.
There are many confounding factors, of course. My point
Trump
is,
won. Oh my God.
She ran a dog shit campaign. She ran a dog shit campaign because she thought she had it in the bag, just like Obama didn't go ahead and supersede rules that mean literally nothing because there's no legislative backing.
Even Lactoid agrees that there's no fucking way Obama could have just put Merrick Garland's ass on the bench. We agree on that, right, Lactoid? There's no way.
It would seem a very uphill battle. One lawyer seems to think it's a good idea, but
one lawyer also said that Vice President Pence could just make Trump the winner in 2022.
Why would you give a shit about this specific one?
It's not a question of norms whether or not he can do it. Josiah doesn't think Obama even had the option. Not that Obama could have done it by violating the norm.
Yeah. If I thought Obama could do it and get away with it, sure, but there's no fucking.
You don't see a problem with this way of thinking, though. Like, if they can get away with it, it's okay, right? Like,
I think to which
point,
no,
I mean,
voters...
if it was legal, when I say get away with it, I mean legal.
I know what you mean.
It's not within the president's power.
Having legal arguments.
You guys,
I thought we weren't doing legal arguments within the first 5 minutes of this
I know, and they're just like pissed.
And now we're doing legal arguments because we're
not just legal arguments. We're back in 2016 and how bad Trump was and how ridiculous it was that he got elected.
Chat, you're going to see a lot of things during this trial. If you direct your evidence to attention to what's the piece of evidence, Lactoid? Like the term
Exhibit A.
Like exhibit. Thank you. Direct your attention to exhibit number 1. Anyways, I think to which point there is a ability for voters to recognize some differences, but I think to Josiah's point, it's not nearly enough. Republicans do get held to account for some of their things, but I think it's nowhere to the same degree that Democrats do. But the problem is that is something we have to contend with. The reality is
that's just reality, right? That's just reality. It's not fair. It's not fair. We can complain. We can complain all day about how fair it is. We can complain.
The problem is that reality is getting real fed.
We can complain all day.
We can't escape it.
Yeah, we have to deal with reality, how it is, rather than how we would like to be. Wishes and hopes and dreams, you put that in one hand, and then I'll shit in the other, and we'll see which fills up first, right?
Wait, can I respond? I'd love to go. I'm going to go.
Go, Stack.
The idea that the average centrist voter in 2020 changed their vote to Democrats because they looked at the Republicans or they looked at the Democrats and like the main reason why they swapped was because of rule of law norms is one of the most illiterate things I've ever heard when engaging with the average American. The average American cares way more about abortion laws, which is the huge reason why 2020 happened. Yes, thank you.
2022, you mean, right?
2022. 2020 had no plan.
2022.
Yeah, let's get our facts straight. I know you have trouble like contending with these things, but look, the average voter, if Trump wasn't as acidic as he was, even with all the other things stacked against them, Republicans would have taken 2020. They absolutely would.
Wait, 2020 or
Wait, I want to ask you a question, Wick.
Go ahead. I meant 2022.
Wait, Wick. Oh. So based on some of the argument, and I want to put the fucking political strategizing to rest a little bit with this question. Let's say we could predict the future, and actually by doing this, it would benefit the Democratic Party's popularity because the Democrats would be like, "Oh yes, finally they got some balls. Like we're gonna fucking." Then would you be like, "All right, man, just start you're threatening the Medicaid funding"?
No,
to start threatening everything.
No, because I'm a processes guy. I'm a processes guy. I believe in processes. I think that the process should be trusted, implemented in such a way as to mitigate bad actors. Because I don't care, right, if it's for the bestest of causes and the bestest of reasons that we do a really shitty thing or do it in a really shitty way, right? I think that like the righteousness of a cause is secondary to the process by which we implement it. I want to tone down the extremities. I want to be moderate. Right, and the way I do that is through the process. So I'm a believer in process.
And I have to. Okay, I'm sorry. Of that process is us doing away with these unspoken rules that anybody can say go whatever way they want to do, and we start actually legislating.
Thank you. That's what I was just about to say.
Wick, I've got to ask. I'm sorry if you're such an institutionalist in the processes. I've just got to know. Easy example. Does that mean you would have not supported President Lincoln during the Civil War, given that he violated the process quite a bit, suspending writ of habeas corpus, ignoring federal laws and federal court decisions?
Of course not.
Okay.
Why? He violated the process.
Because there are extremities in situations where I believe that processes can be violated. But my line for that is so far beyond what I think what you all have demonstrated today that it's not even worth discussing.
Then fair enough. I just want to be clear that your love of process has a
limits. Yes, that's part of the process.
Perfect.
Part of the process is exceptions to the process, right?
Yeah. But that's what we've been saying, though, right? Like slavery and like attacking Fort Sumter is on one end, and the other one of like, states want to craft their own rules about who gets to play football in certain teams.
I'm just saying, don't feed me a lot of bullshit about your love for institutions when there's a little asterisk at the end. Right now, we're just talking about degrees.
I'm not
we're quibbling over degrees.
Are you in favor of war?
Josiah, wait a minute, Josiah.
Every war. Or
bring it, Flo. Bring it, baby.
Just channel our love of Star Wars. To believe in an idea is to be willing to betray it. Everything has an asterisk. Everything has limits. In the same way... Right. Yes, yeah. So I think it's fair for Wick to say that he still does believe there are limits, but his line is way across the line.
No, that is completely fair. I
have a follow-up for question, Wick, though. Wick, I want to sort of amend Lactoid's hypothetical. Let's say it isn't just short-term consequences. Democrats go dirty. It doesn't just help them in the election. It actually does not have any of the bad consequences. It doesn't make Republicans go crazy
ever
for the next 100 years. For the next 200 years, it's not going to have any bad effect. Would you be like, you know what? Processes are ultimately a means to an end, and this seems like the end is no longer good. Or would you say the value in and of itself is still worth defending?
The value in itself is still worth defending because if my life is better, if we can create this AI dictator that does away with democracy and it's better for everyone, I would still say the value of people being able to have a say outweighs that. So yes, I would be against it.
Okay. This is your brain on deontology right here. Like you are accepting that things could be better and saying no to it.
Because the value I have isn't just how comfortable I am. It's how much I have a say in my reality and how much I let others have a say in their reality. So even if I could, by all means, make the person's life, my next door neighbor's life, infinitely better, but if I violate their consent to do so, that is wrong.
There's 100 utility monsters that we could throw at you, and you would be very, very, very hard pressed to like say,
I
"Oh,
can't believe the
utilitarian is
example
only
of
the-"
100 kids to end racism. That's a bargain deal. That's a bargain deal right there.
I'll kill 100 kids to end racism.
Somebody
Yeah,
clip that.
Don't say that
Clip
on
that right
fucking
now.
Twitch, gang.
In Minecraft, you set it
Can I
up.
get any information on which kids we're killing before I make the decision? Like, are they the kids of people I don't like?
Are
or
they
like
white kids?
I don't
They're
know,
black
but
kids.
Flow
They're all
Trace's
Make-A-Wish Foundation
hypothetical
kids.
was so good. If I stood up, I would have violated TOS. That's how excited it made me with your hypothetical. I
I
love
think I
it.
saw a Wolverine cosplayer that did that.
Yeah.
Okay. we've kind of gotten... Any more questions or inquisitions for Wick before we move on to the topic at hand?
Why are you
How
fundamentally?
many kids would you kill to get us universal health care?
I wouldn't kill kids!
There should be a panel.
That's a
Why don't we
hill!
have a panel?
That's a hill!
We all
I'm gonna
react
die
to
on not killing kids! Don't kill kids, gang! Don't do it! I'm gonna take this brave stance today! I don't care how much of an asshole they are!
I'm disagreeing with you. Under 18, make them Soylent Green. 2024, Resi, let's go.
We're not there yet. Give it
So
4 more
let's
years.
I mean,
let's
that's
bring this back to
essentially
the real
abortion
world.
debate. So
Let's bring this back to the real world, right?
Whoa!
We can pray.
Oh gosh. Let's bring this back to the real world a little bit.
No,
okay?
this is the most interested I've been in the conversation in like
I'm
45
sure you
minutes.
have, dude. Okay. Given that we don't live in a world where we can predict the future, okay? Given that we don't have these tools, these hypothetical little play toys to play with, okay? We do not know the consequences of our actions, but we can perhaps see some of the potentials in our actions.
We do a little Bayesian analysis.
A little bit, right? And I think that that is the question up for debate today when it comes to Biden, or really any sitting president, withholding federal funds to a state for violating whatever conditions that the federal government or the executive branch wants to put into power. And is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Under which conditions are they good, and under which conditions are they bad? And it's been interesting to me to see how, in some cases, the legality of it has taken center stage. But go ahead, Flow Trace, and then @Xiem's, and then
Yeah, Stacks had a great question a while back that no one
Okay,
answered,
please.
which was what would the
to it?
I just thought of a great one. I think that, again, I think that Republicans would probably be doing some of this anyways, but I think one they'd feel a lot more certain, let's say, would be much more likely to do, since we don't know the future 100%, would be them doing the exact reverse. Going after states and saying, oh, you are not going to separate out the trans women from cis women in your sports, then we're going to be going after your funding. We're going to go after your 8% federal funding. That's a likelihood that I rate as being significantly more likely in the world where we go forward with this. And again, I don't think that this is going to actually give us significant gains in preventing this kind of legislation in the first place. So we're really stacking up a lot of potential downsides to very little potential upside is the reason why I side against it.
or what
I
if the other
think you're
Republicans say like
hinging
no
so-
Medicaid if you don't criminalize abortion, right? I mean, that would be fucking huge.
Yep.
Well, I just think in the end, so much, and I love you for it because I love your optimism. But it's like, yeah, right here, man. But I got to tell you, so much of this is contingent on Republican largesse, and you have way more faith in it than I do. I think that for many of them, there is a calculus involved. You take somebody like Mitch McConnell. I do agree with Wick to some extent that Mitch McConnell is strategic about when, where, and how he breaks norms, and when, where, and how he escalates things. Completely agree with that. But I don't believe that this is a turn-based RPG or that there's some sort of magical contract that compels Republicans to wait to act until Democrats do a thing first. I think they act when they think it's in their interests and when they think they can get away with it. And don't get me wrong, I would prefer approaches that would take the potential incitement of escalation off the table. But absent that, I I don't think that relying on Republicans maybe not acting in good faith or not acting in bad faith the next time, I don't think that that's a compelling reason for President Biden to not avail himself of a legal act that has a good end, which is in this case, I think we're hung up on the Title IX stuff. I just don't see it that way.
I think I can formulate my position within your framework. I don't trust Republicans to not act in bad faith. They're going to do whatever they can, whenever they can. Sorry, Lactoid. But I think whether or not something is listen. Hey, you're a libertarian, so you should be target free here.
I know that's like why it's like it's just constant. Like
I think Republicans are going to do whatever they think they can get away with, but what they can get away with is dependent upon the perception of the American people, which is not perfect, but it is still there. And I think that perception is dependent upon the actions of Democrats, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. But that is still going to be like a base of logic. Republicans are not going to think that their voters are going to let them get away with as much if we don't do this. Is my opinion.
I think Democrats are just like bad, right? They're these like dastardly kind of like plotting foxes, and they're actually the ones we got to watch out for.
What does the
and in
fox
reality,
say?
like they constantly break norms and they undermine things. I mean, look at the filibuster, right? They're pushing for things that the Republicans aren't pushing for. We can just write them off. We gotta go ahead and
salty.
We gotta pull all Title IX funding unless you specifically segregate all teams by everything, right? In fact, everybody gets
I would agree with you, but like the Republican Party just got off the fucking deep end, bro. Like vaccines, global warming, the election. I can't take it anymore. You're breaking my heart.
We can say both sides a lot if that helps. If we can indulge a false equivalence that both parties are equally bad, if that helps your libertarian sensibilities.
Let's turn the panel to Republicans versus Democrats, which is better.
Well, that's what the panel
Willing to
said.
disavow some
Well,
stuff.
we might do this, but only because they do it, right? I mean, I think that, again, like I said, I think the only two, unless you guys just really, really, really like just hate Republicans, and this is the only reason why you think this is justified, okay? If that's the only reason, then sure, we can dictate policy by whataboutism. But I think the question,
it's not just whataboutism. A race
is absolutely
and nowhere did we say that this was good because it would stick it to Republicans.
Well, it might be bad, but what about them? They're doing it too.
It's not.
Lactoid, nowhere did we say that this is only good because it sticks it to Republicans or Republicans have done bad things.
Just a cherry on top, right?
This is the president attempting.
Taken half of the time.
This is the president attempting to pressure red states to either revisit or silence or stop discriminatory practices against a marginalized group. That in and of itself is a good thing. That in and of itself is a good reason for President Biden to do this.
Whoa, not in of itself, right? Like there needs to be
if it's legal, sure.
Hold on. There needs to be like more exploration than just like, is this group marginalized? Then like we have to like step in. Well, no, like there's question as to, this is why I think like there's a question as to the federalism, which I think is important. And we haven't even really got into like, because maybe it would be like a little bit of a derail, but we haven't really got into like the actual specific policies and like the bases of them, right? So is it discriminatory to not allow men and women or to play on the exact same like high level football team? Yeah, that is discriminatory, right? Do you think that we should just like nix those rules? I mean, hey, discrimination. We got to stop it everywhere. Or do we say, wait a minute, there's like other considerations here that like maybe we got to take into consideration, like physical health?
I want to take Lactoid. I want to take issue even like within this Title IX provision. If we read the article right, they were even saying like in sports where there is a competitive advantage conferred due to whatever, right? That would be a thing. I think that when it comes to precision sports, archery, shooting, and like even curling or something like that, like probably we actually should have mixed gender things, right? And I think that's even a proviso within Title IX. So I think that this Title IX change that they're looking at, I don't necessarily like the way you're arguing this.
So I read the article too. So first of all, it is vague. It's incredibly vague as to what kind of what it would put forward. It states that there is suggestions that there is suggestions that like if like risk of harm is that's a consideration. It's not necessarily the consideration, but it is a consideration that maybe they wouldn't go after them if like we separate like MMAs or whatever. But like at the same time, like first of all, how vague it is troubling. And this is like kind of blow your minds. I'm actually perfectly fine with like fully co-ed sports. I actually think that like women's sports is like affirmative action for women, and it's stupid. I think that there should be fully co-ed sports. I just think that like states have a perfectly rational basis when they're like thinking when they're thinking about like different ways to like regulate sporting in their state from what their perceptions are as to fairness or health or safety, and like recognizing that there's certain benefits, like biological strength benefits that are imparted through puberty for biological males. I don't think that that's like to the point where, well, we don't have that conversation. They're being discriminatory. That's enough. No, there's like a real conversation to be had as to, are they being reasonable in their discriminatory actions? I think discrimination can be reasonable. Discrimination can sometimes be good.
Well, my understanding is that isn't this threat of like withholding federal funds from schools? It's if states apply like a one size fits all policy. Basically, if they don't have a nuanced approach to whatever discriminatory practices they employ. So even as far as I'm aware, the Biden administration is being eminently good faith here. It seems like they're tacitly conceding there are times, circumstances, and sports in which you can quote unquote discriminate, like you said, between like men's and women's teams. You know what I mean? So like, I feel like it's still giving them latitude. It's just saying you can't be fucking bigoted.
It's some latitude, but it's not like latitude for swimming was one example they brought up. I mean, do you think there's like not like biological benefits for swimming that might be imparted through going through male puberty?
Okay, so here is a
what about benefits that actually benefit women?
What about the benefits that benefit me? $5 from Fondue to say Mitch McConnell warned the Democrats about changing the rules to a flat majority to confirming justices, saying they would regret it. Okay, that's all I had. $5. Thank you.
That?
More super chats.
Wait a minute.
That was Fondue.
Who said that?
Fondue in my YouTube. Fondue.
Is Fondue an alias of yours? Because I've heard you say that before, you son of a bitch.
I have said that before.
You paid yourself $5 to bring that up.
That is absolutely...
Well, Fondue, you and I are going to have some words, buddy, because that in and itself has a context. Harry Reid did what he did because the McConnell Senate...
We can rehash that another day. I'll have you on Lactoid. I'm not Lactoid. I have you on again, Pondering, and we can revisit it if you'd like. But, gang, I want to take this opportunity to get me more money. So if you're watching this content and you've liked the discussion, if you've enjoyed it, give me money. Incentivize me to do the right thing and have more of these panels. To do what you want me to do by super chatting. If you super chat, I'll ask the questions, right? By throwing me bits and gifting subs in my channel, you get awesome emotes and things like that. Incentivize me to do the right thing. Make me go high. Otherwise, there will be consequences.
As an incentive, I will remind the audience that
and Omnipotent, thanks for the bits, but go on.
Well, I was going to say the last time that Wick, I think it was like, did we say 4,000 subs or something like that? And Lactoid committed to voting Democrat in the next presidential election. I believe that was a conversation we had, and he made that public commitment.
I don't think that's what happened. I think
Lactoid, how dare you?
It's more leftist misinformation. I think that's what this is.
Realistically, I think that we can get Wick enough subs that he is going to justify intergender MMA, and the day that we have that is the day that Wick finally gets to do what he's always wanted to do: punch
Kid Not Kin, thank you for the bits.
Rather than get his Nintendo Switch taken away from him by his wife's boyfriend.
The ELO system actually is the best system, by the way.
The ELO system, like in the league? Are we talking about league?
Yes, you have like an ELO system, but for all sports. So like at the bottom, like you have like children, and then like you move up a little bit and it's like children and women.
Well, please, let's get back to the politics. Okay, league is
hey, everything's politics, all right?
Yeah.
So.
I guess we've kind of covered a lot here. Is there anything that we should have covered today during this topic that we haven't yet, and we can do so in the next 10 minutes or so?
My question is, and I appreciate Lactoid sending that article, because I'd forgotten about the Title IX thing, because the topic is so much broader than the Title IX situation. As far as any of you are aware, have there been calls to or threats by the Biden administration or Democrats to like make more aggressive attempts to withhold funding for like to support trans people? Because I've just not seen it. So I didn't know if this was like it's obviously, I understand the purpose of the question, but I didn't know if it also is trending in that direction politically.
I think this is testing the waters.
No, I think that like originally in the opening statements or close to the opening statements, I think it was FlowTrace. It may have been FlowTrace. It may have been Portland actually that said that a lot of trans advocates groups says this doesn't go far enough. So there is advocates to make this harsher, if you will.
What were you saying, Rezi? I'm sorry.
Any
No, you're okay.
legitimate
I
advocates
actually-
or just
no,
people
I
on
remember,
Twitter?
Originally, I kind of
No,
postulated
there's
this
like
as I read
legitimate
about
advocacy groups. I can't remember the names off the top of my head.
Oh, sorry. I originally postulated this panel to Wick because Sarah Sanders was requesting federal funding the day after she was trying to deny local funding within her state. And then that turned into the whole Biden thing. So no, I actually would agree. I don't really think there has been a large push by Democrats to do this kind of funding measure. But I do think that at least in terms of like, the spirit of the law and like my hopes that someday we can all live in our 200-person NCOM collectives where one person gets elected to go on a Zoom meeting once a week with 6 unlike-minded individuals and then yell about what we should do. And then we allow that to grow up from there. That's ultimately what I want, Magnovium collectives.
I respect that. My fantasy is to become the all-powerful president of the United States and force Lactoid to be my attorney general.
Oh, dude, no, my
That's what I
fantasy
want.
on
That's
this
what I
is
want
you would
so
get
bad.
Nothing done. You would get
being
nothing
of pure
done.
darkness who emanates and crags the wheels of this universe and grinds them and destroys all things and recreates it in my own image. But like, that's just hopes and dreams.
That was beautiful, man.
I know, it's really
I
hot.
like
I
that.
would have a huge cock.
Okay, some questions from my audience. So Dunkin' Donuts asks, Dunkin' Donuts, haha. I'm curious if panelists are concerned about future backlash for perceived deviations of norms if Republicans take the White House. I think we discussed this ad nauseum on the panel. Welcome to the show. But that has been a point
I don't
of
think we've
contention.
talked about it at all. Has this even come up one
They
time?
might do the same thing. Who knows?
Yes. Any other questions? Feel free to send me
I'm back,
money.
y'all. Sorry
And
about
we are one individual donor away from a hype train. So if anyone wants to wick out, they can give me 100 bits or a sub to do that. But
Am I coming through, by the way? Fine for all y'all?
Yeah.
now you are. You weren't for a while. I don't know
Yeah,
what you were trying to do, but
Lactoid blew my mind, and then he blew my headset.
okay.
And I had to go
Way to
find a
go,
replacement, but I'm
Lactoid.
good now.
I turned down my gain, so I don't know what that's.
No, it wasn't actually you.
You
When
were
I did the
so
mind blowing
quiet.
gag, I tugged on a cord and it all went wrong.
All right, Miss Plays, thank you for the 100 bits. Let's go. Let's wick out. Let's get those all the way to the top here. But okay, so
No,
we are winding
not.
down. Oh, go on.
Sorry,
There
I thought
is-
we were doing the thing.
There is one thing that I wish we talked about a little bit more,
Please.
which is just the Republican hating. I wish that kind of we all
We didn't
a
really
little
cover
bit
it
more.
enough. Yeah.
Yes. I'll
Just-
have.
We really let him
I'll
off
do my
easy.
own
For
monologue
some
after the
reason-
show.
For
Don't
some
worry
reason, you
about it.
haven't gotten
We'll
into a
have closing
monologue on how
statements.
much
You can
we're
choose to use however
sexually
you
better
like.
than all the
We can
Republicans.
choose to use that however you like. I will say as my own closing statement here that the process is important. This is just my opinion. Obviously, the panel disagrees, but I think that the process is important. That while yes, it is unfair that Democrats are held to a different standard, it's also reality, and we have to acknowledge it and work within it. I am a pragmatist at heart, and I want to do the best thing for the situation that plays into the process. Stabby Stitches, thank you for the Prime sub. Really appreciate you. And thank you to all my donors. It's been great. This has been a great show. We have some great shows coming up. Tuesday, we're going to do another Sunday show with me and President Sunday, and we're going to watch the Alex Jones versus Destiny debate. This will be a YouTube exclusive. Then on Thursday, we are going to have something different. The Riz Royale, where Irrelevant, Darius, Scumbag, and I will all be competing for Pixie's digital hand. We will go through a series of challenges, answer a series of questions, and be judged.
I'm judging you right now.
Sleeve and Madam Genevieve will preside as the resident Riz Lords, and it should be a good
Wait, Pixie
fun
doesn't even get to
time.
choose?
Pixie does get to choose in the end, but there will be you'll be the audience can participate. They'll get to pay for things like dance offs and things like that if they donate enough. And so if you want to see me versus Irrelevant in a dance off, get your wallets open and get ready for that. But I want to give all these individuals a chance to have say, shout themselves out, and a final thoughts on the subject at hand. Or if they want to just bash Republicans or Democrats, they may. And I want to start off with 𝕵𝖎. Go ahead.
My name is 𝕵𝖎. You can check me out at twitch.tv/𝕵𝖎, where I'm live now, and I'm going to be live the rest of the day. Twitter.com/𝕵𝖎. I just want to thank Wick, all my fellow panelists, and the viewers watching on many different live streams right now. At the end of the day, this is a country we share with people we may not like. Some of them may be Republicans, and that's something we've got to contend with, whether or not we like or dislike it. And at the end of the day, you've got to be able to share one roof, and I just worry that sometimes, Democrats might be escalating just a little too much. I'm okay with escalating, but you got to know when to let your foot off the gas just a little bit. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, 𝕵𝖎, gang, check him out. Let's go to 𝕾𝖘. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on, Wick. I think everybody thinks the other side is doing worse than their side. That's just one of the, I guess, natural issues with human consciousness, where we always seem to perceive the worst in others and the best in ourselves. I think it's not good when this strategy is employed by anybody. I think generally, like absent some kind of sufficient condition, it's not good. And I would agree that hopefully we should try to codify something if we can. If you like what I have to say, you can find me at withhold on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube.
Gang, check him out. He's great. We joke about him being a little bit of the token libertarian, and that's entirely true. It's not a joke. It's very serious. But no, 𝕾𝖘, we love you. Thank you for coming. Check him out, gang. 𝕾𝖘 TV. Next up, Pondering Politics. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I am Pondering Politics, aka the artist formerly known as Ruminate. Real name is 𝕻𝖎. Again, Destiny Orbiter. I'm trying to push him back towards politics, away from drama. Not doing too hot. I do not like Republicans. I think I've hinted at that, and I've not made that particularly clear. I do love 𝕾𝖘, however, and my life's mission is currently to make him a proud Democrat. You can find
we're going
me
to say
on...
𝕾𝖘 for sure.
Yeah, exactly. He's my new project, baby. You can find me on YouTube at YouTube/Pondering Politics. And yeah, thanks, Wick. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming by. It's been too long, and we need to have you on more of these. So thank you. Thank you for coming and being a strong advocate for your dumbass ideas. I really appreciate it. No, we love you. Thank you. Next up, speaking of dumbass ideas, Portland, please.
Hilarious as always, Wick. Your timing is impeccable. I appreciate everybody's time. I didn't feel any of the arguments against Biden doing the thing that he has the authority and capacity to do particularly compelling. So my position is unchanged, but I did enjoy the conversation, and I look forward to talking to all of you about unrelated and fun matters again in the future. Wick, did you get that 𝕻𝖎 thing figured out yet?
It's in process. It's in process. It's in process.
He DM'd me a couple minutes ago during this broadcast, and I'm going to share the details with you later on. But I was just curious about whether or not the territory was being figured out.
𝕬𝖎 Wu,
and y'all stay updated.
𝕬𝖎 Wu and 𝕻𝖎. It's not 100%. But it might happen. It might happen on my channel. We're working it out. 𝕬𝖎 Wu's spearheading that. I want it to happen. I want it with my whole heart to happen. But we will see. I don't want to get my hopes up because I've been hurt before, gang. I've been hurt before. I don't want to be hurt again. Portland, thank you for coming by. You can check him out at Portland is Burning on Twitch, and PDX is Burning on Twitter. And I don't even know if you have a YouTube. So.
Well, I do, but there's nothing on it at the moment. So, just follow me on here. We're doing a rare stream today. So if you want to pop over and give me a follow, that'd be super cool. If not, you're dead to me. So thanks, everybody.
Gang. Speaking of being dead to me, 𝕻𝖎, please go ahead.
That's a weird way to intro me, but sure. Thank you. This was actually very enjoyable for me. I want to say I'm glad that we got into something that's a little bit less than the circle jerk meta of the same four conversations that we normally have, and going into state versus citizen power is something I'm always interested in. Second, I want to actually thank my all the panelists here, even the ones that I'm in disagreement with. I was hoping that I was going to be making fun of you more and making more ad hominem attacks. However, I actually want to say this was a fun challenge and I enjoyed that. Thirdly, I want to say that my opinion is unchanged. We still need to go ahead and empower the legislature, as it has lost power to the judiciary and the executive since World War II. And we need to go ahead and do that so that way we can go ahead and actually impact the will of the people, which is what I care about, is the power of the will of the people and my small Ancon collectives ruled by my big dick shadow form. And finally, I am 𝕍𝖎 on all platforms. You can find me every day from Tuesday through Friday, 3 to 8 on Twitch and YouTube, as well as content that I'm producing on YouTube and sometimes on Kick, where I say things about 𝕬𝖎𝖙 that I can't say on any other platform. Thank you for your guys' time, and this was really fun. Thank you.
Check him out, 𝕍𝖎 on Twitch and YouTube. Go give him a follow, gang. He's great. Last but certainly not least, unless you count height, in which I think he gives the smallest energy of us all, 𝕲𝖬𝖚s, go ahead.
I think I'm the tallest one here. I don't know what the hell that meant.
You can't be bigger than 5'2". You can't be bigger than 5'2", dude. Like,
Ruminate's right there. He's tiny. I've met him in person. He is so small.
I'm trolling you, but go ahead.
This is I know this is all. I appreciate the conversation. Really appreciate the panelists. Thank you, Wick, for having me. I was not swayed by any of the outcomes, but I did find your arguments to be thoughtful and intriguing and something worth thinking about. You can find me at 𝕲𝖬𝖚s pretty much anywhere. I mostly reside on TikTok and Twitter. I know Pondering is. I know 𝕲𝖎𝖚 can't help but mention Destiny every time he speaks, but we do have a podcast every Sunday where we're like streaming together and just hating on Republicans. So join us there then. Yeah, I think that's all.
Lactoid's going to be our third wheel. Okay, guys.
Let's
go.
Fun, gang. Check him out.
I'm taking him. He's going to be a left libertarian by the time I'm done.
No.
I'm going to give him all the shit.
I called dibs. Wick, I called dibs. I called dibs on Lactoid.
It's going to be amazing.
See, this is the real dating show, but it's like it's political, like shit. But it's
Bits,
me,
if you want to give custody to
@𝕲𝖚𝖚s,
if you want to give custody to 𝕲𝖬𝖚s and 𝕲𝖎𝖚, it's a two-parent household. Or subs if you want to give custody to 𝕍𝖎, who lives in a van on the by the river.
He's going to be an irresponsible parent to Lactoid.
On this panel, and I dare any of you to prove me wrong.
You would be an irresponsible.
We're rating out.
I just want to hang out.
Would he be well taken care of?
None of this weird infantilizing of Lactoid. I want to win him over as as friends and
I want to suck him off just to be so
Lactoid, you want to play Remote with me?
All of your weird parental stuff are starting to sound a little Mr. Girly.
See you all Tuesday tomorrow on YouTube. YouTube.com/@WhickTV. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.